Well, greeting everyone, and sorry for the late start. Um, Thank you very much for taking part in this important seminar. We have excellent speakers, both Bahrainis and non-Bahrainis, in this event today, titling "Deepening Political and Human Rights Crisis in Bahrain." As you know, since February 11th, February 14th, 2011, the people of Bahrain had their own chapter of Arab Spring, where thousands of people took to the street demanding, first, the demand were political reform or deep political reform, economic justice, and respect for human rights. Those demands immediately changed from reform to actually changing or removing the regime, which was actually a title or a call that was very famous during that time in the different Arab Springs in the region. The reaction from the Bahraini government was very severe. Thousands of people were arrested. Human rights violations were widely or took place in a wide range: extrajudicial killing, arrest, arbitrary detention, attack on freedom of expression. Several laws were introduced where basically curbed whatever reform or whatever space civil society political opposition had at that time. We also had the basically disbanding the political opposition in the country, led by the main opposition party at that time, Al-Wafaq National or Wafaq Islamic National Society. Today we have four panelists who will discuss both the political situation in the country and the human rights crisis, and how can Bahrain basically either start a reconciliation process, or what will be the way outcome for this country that's been suffering this political stagnation for the last 9 years. A country that has thousands of political prisoners does not show any kind of stability. A country that has freedom of expression issues shows that the government is not stable, because if it was, then it will not be going after someone or people who criticize the government. So on the panel today, we have Dr. Saeed Shihabi, who is a veteran of the political opposition in Bahrain, has been leading or one of the leaders in the pro-democracy movement in the country. He lives in London in exile. His citizenship was revoked. I think he's one of the few who his citizenship was revoked twice, in the early 80s and then again in November of 2012. He's an engineer by training or education. However, he's a journalist by profession. Has been written several articles that appeared in different Middle Eastern publication. We also have Fabiana Porzoli, who is ADHRB's advocacy assistant in Rome, Italy. She led ADHRB's team there, where we where several parliamentary questions were tabled, briefing and hearing took place, and she raised the issue of human rights violations with the authorities in Rome. We also have in our panel Salma Al-Musawi, who heads our ADHRB's documentation and legal advocacy effort. Salma oversees the UN complaints program that where we document violations of human rights in Bahrain and other GCC countries, and submit those documentation, or convert the documentation into a UN complaints program, then those submitted to both United Nations special procedures and also some other authorities in different countries that has strong ties with Bahrain. Last but not least, we have Mr. Ali Mshema, who is, of course, the son of one of the leading political opposition leader in Bahrain, Mr. Hassan Mshema. Ali lives in London in exile, where he is a political asylee. Famously, Ali held camp out and hunger strike outside the Bahraini embassy for weeks, demanding medical treatment and medical care for his father, who has been denied medical care for some time, or for actually since his arrest. We've been going through this cycle. Ali also active in the pro-democracy movement in Bahrain, and his activities include meetings with officials in UK, and several writings appear in different publications. Without any further ado, I would like to turn the floor to Fabiana to begin her presentation. Fabiana, please.
Thank you, Hussein. So, Italy is one of those few European countries that have an embassy in Bahrain, and it could become a strong medium that could listen to the many stories of violation of human rights and political grievances of human rights defenders and their families and legals and in general the Bahraini people. And it could also help in shaping a new and stronger Italian, but also European policy to address the behavior of the regime against its citizens in order to hold accountable perpetrators of human rights violations and finally start a political dialogue. As a matter of fact, the situation of human rights in Bahrain has unfortunately deteriorated in the past years to a level where it became the norm because of the attacks to the freedom of expression and the attacks to the freedom of association perpetrated by the Bahraini authorities. I'm not saying it became acceptable, no one could ever accept it, but self-censorship became part of the daily life of Bahraini citizens in order to avoid serious consequences. And these attacks have reached a level that not only political discussion and human rights discussion became forbidden in the country and people are punished for them, but also general critics to the measure the Bahraini government has taken during the coronavirus pandemic to cope with the virus, and the thousands of infected in the country have caused ordinary citizens to be summoned to police stations and prosecutory offices because they have dared to criticize the government reaction. But up to today, unfortunately, we have not seen Bahrain to be held accountable for these human rights violations from its allies, and especially from the two biggest allies of Bahrain, the United States and the United Kingdom. Human rights violations and political abuses have always been covered up, and perpetrators of atrocities and torture can walk freely without being persecuted or arrested or being held accountable in any way. And this is partially possible because of the strong relationships Bahrain has with these two countries. But as a matter of fact, the criticism that Bahrain gets from Italian MPs who advocate for human rights, or Spanish MPs, or some members of the Congress, or other legislators and members of other European parliaments, is actually a positive sign, showing awareness that there are human rights violations in the country, and that there is a political crisis in the country. However, because of the special relationships Bahrain enjoys with the US and the UK, the Al Khalifa regime feels that it basically can shield itself from criticism because it will always have the unconditional support of the two countries. So, for example, here in Italy, we have been advocating for a change in Italian policy towards Bahrain, and we have seen good reaction from a good number of MPs, leading MPs in the Italian parliament. And parliamentary questions were asked on many aspects concerning Bahrain. Communication with the king has been done by various MPs and senators. Events took place, hearings in the Italian parliament took place. Even the action of the former ambassador and the current one have been questioned by leading members of the Italian parliament to raise attention to the political situation of Bahrain and the failure of existing Italian policies. But the issue is, as long as the US and the UK are supporting Bahrain's line and basically looking to the other direction when it comes to the government's behavior on content of human rights and political crisis and how citizens and human rights defenders are treated in Bahraini prisons, I think the issue is going to continue. The last thing I want to refer to is we can talk about human rights violations all day long. Report after reports have been authored by leading human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and others. However, the issue cannot be discussed without addressing the underlying political decay in the country. And human rights can only be protected when there is a fair and just political system. For this reason, people of Bahrain in February 2011 came to the streets in large number asking for a fair and just political system and demanding more political rights. But up to today, these grievances have not been addressed. And until these political rights and these political grievances are not addressed, I don't think we are going to see the Bahraini government respecting the rights of its citizens anytime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiana, for your presentation. I think you ended your presentation at an excellent point of raising the political decay, the fair and just political system that is needed to protect human rights. I remember since my days in Bahrain, whether hearing from my father directly or hearing from others who been through several uprisings in the country, that there is a saying every 10 years we have an uprising in Bahrain. So one can make the conclusion that the government comes and address some of these issues. However, because as you stated, there is a political decay, and I think we have an excellent speaker, Dr. Saeed Al-Shihabi, who can tell us basically is the issue in Bahrain. So if tomorrow the Bahraini government release all the political prisoners, we don't have any prisoners like it happened in early 2000, will this resolve the issue? If not, then what is the way outcome in your view as a leading veteran, someone who's been in the pro-democracy movement for the last 40 years, or actually more than 40 years? Dr. Saeed, you have the floor. If you could unmute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who's calling me just a minute on Skype? I'll just, sorry. Anyway, I can't, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. If you can hang up this Skype call or sign out.
I will sign out. Oh, it's nobody. Anyway, it has gone. Thank you very much, Hussein. Thank you, Fabiana. Thank you for all those who have made it to this online seminar. Number one, we have just lived through the racism crisis in the United States, and the slogan of "I cannot breathe" has been widely used. And in Bahrain, we can breathe, but we only breathe the toxic fumes of the regime's propaganda. And if you decide to breathe clean air or aspire to have a cleaner atmosphere, then you will end up behind bars, tortured, ill-treated. Maybe your citizenship will be abrogated, and you could also find yourself on a plane to depart from the country. How many countries in the world put their citizens on planes and deport them officially, openly, with no repercussions at all? How many people in the world, how many rulers in the world try to change the demographic composition of their societies? They don't like these people. The natives are not nice people. Let us change them with different new people. Let us bring people from abroad and naturalize them and grant them Bahraini citizenship. At the same time, when you revoke the citizenship of many people, and I am only one of many whose citizenship has been revoked. So we cannot breathe in Bahrain at all. And ask Nabil Rajab, ask Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, the veteran human rights activist, and then ask Sheikh Ali Salban, Hassan Mushema, Abdul Wahab Hussein, ask them. They couldn't breathe, and when they attempted to breathe, they have been sentenced by military court to life imprisonment. Many of us had more than life imprisonments on our heads. Never mind, that is not a big price to pay for freedom. We have always aspired for freedom. We will continue to do so. This is number one. Number two, about there's a saying that says that the fish rots from the head down. So you have when you go to the market and you want to buy fish, you always have to look for the head, and you look at the head, and if it is rotten, then there's no point of you attempting to buy it, because the whole fish will have rotten if the head has rotten. In Bahrain, the rot starts from the top, from the ruler himself. Why am I saying that? I am not only putting a slogan, but I am saying it from experience, because I had personally met the king twice in the last 20 years, and I have heard from him, and he promised a lot. Him and his emissaries here in the UK, ambassadors and so on, we met them several times. Nothing has come from them. They promised a lot, but they give you what you want when you speak to them. But if you speak too much, like what Hassan Mushami did with me in the last time we met in 2008 in London with the head of the state, he went back immediately. He was arrested by the ambassador who was with us at the time at the meeting with the king. We were together, and but then later, 2 or 3 months later, he went back and he became the head of the National Security Agency. And when Hassan Mushami went back, he arrested him. So how much faith you can put in a regime that continues to lie and gives a hollow promises, and also aspire to be much bigger than what he is? In 2002, he crowned himself to be a king, the king of the smallest country in the Arab world. So this is another point. The third point is about the human rights and whether we can improve the human rights. I appreciate very much the work and applaud the work of a human rights activist. I was one of them in my early life in the early 80s, and but the question I ask is that, can we ever have human rights under dictatorship? Can a dictator respect the human rights? Can a despot, can a tyrant respect the human rights? I do not believe the two can come together. So of course we have to work for human rights. Of course we have to report human rights violations and abuses to the international bodies. Of course we have to raise the banner of human rights. But at the same time, I believe that parallel with the human rights issue, we must also raise the banner of political transformation, changing the regime into a better one, into a regime that allows us to breathe, that respects our humanity, our freedom, grants us the basic rights of any citizen, And also one other point is that they should, the ruling family must accept to be citizens. At the moment, members of the ruling family do not consider themselves citizens. They are above citizenship. We are all subjects, but they are the rulers. And unless they accept to be citizens with equal rights to people, we can never have a stable society and a stable country. Now, how many minutes, Hussein? You tell me. You just say 2 or 3 minutes or 1 minute?
4 minutes left, Dr. Saeed.
1 minute?
4 minutes.
Oh, 4 minutes. That's, you are very generous. Thank you. So our aspiration is to have a political transformation. This has been the slogan for many decades, for 100 years, since 1922, when the first uprising against the regime took place. Then we had it in the 30s, in the 40s, 1948. We had it in 1954 to 56 uprising. We had it in 1965. That was the first time when I joined the protest. And then we had it in the 70s and so on and so forth until now. We have always raised the banner of political transformation. We wanted, when the British left Bahrain in 1971, one of the conditions that we put to accept an independent state from the British protection is that Bahrain should be ruled by in a democratic way, with the people sharing the power with the ruling family. It was given to us in 1972, but it only lasted until 75 when it was defunct. It was abrogated, and then the constitution was suspended. So that was number one. The first time we were promised something and then violated and abrogated. The regime abrogated that promise. Then in 2000, as Hussein mentioned, in 2001, we were told that we would be having our original constitution, to which we have voted, and we wrote it with our own hands, with the people's representative hands. But only in 2001, 2002, within a year, it was abrogated, and a new constitution was imposed on the people. How many times do you want to be bitten by the same snake? How many times? And I have lived this. I haven't heard it from people. I have lived all these myself. I have heard the ruler. I have been party to the elections of 1972. I was active at the time. So I saw all this with my own eyes. Now it is for the West, the Anglo-American alliance. Would they continue to support these dictators? Do they think that peace and stability of the world can be achieved through the imposition of these rulers without democracy, without respecting people's rights? I believe that the world peace and stability can only be achieved through giving the people the right to live, the right to exercise their humanity, to feel that they are humans, they are something. They cannot, that they are not going to be thrown into the torture dungeons, and then women were raped, as you may have seen in that film, Breaking the Silence, broadcast by the BBC recently, only 2-3 months ago in April. And these are all documentation. So I believe that the Anglo-American alliance must change their course of policy in the Gulf and support the pro-democracy movement, uphold the rule of human rights, stop supporting these dictators simply because they are paying them money and signing with them huge deals on military hardware that are absolutely useless, and they have proven to be useless, as we see in Yemen, that 5 years and the Saudis couldn't make an inch of progress in that country. With these words, I would like our colleagues, our young generation, to also stand up for the support of the pro-democracy activists in that region, because this is where the struggle, historic struggle, past and the present, continue despite all the odds against the people, and despite the might, the military and material might of the regimes. It will continue to be so unless change comes, and you are elements of change as much as we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saeed. We certainly there'll be question and answer session that please make sure you or please post your questions in the chat box, and I'll read them to the participant. Before we go to Selma so she can present, I want to ask you, Salman, if you could address this in your presentation. The Bahraini government claim that they are on the right path. They are taking some practical steps toward reforming or addressing human rights violations. They have released people from prison recently. Of course, the well-known human rights defender Nabil Rajab, who is under alternative sentencing, is out of prison right now. So Selma, have you seen human rights violations documentation decreased? Is the National Institute for Human Rights in Bahrain or the Ombudsman, are they basically doing or holding their mandate according to their charter? Please, Selma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hussein. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us in this online event. I hope I will give many answers in my speech now. I would like in the beginning to introduce you to what we do, or tell you a bit about the main part of our work. We at ADHRB are still working on documenting the ongoing human rights violations in Bahrain, which occur before the arrest, during the arrest process, and further throughout the entire detention period. We have heard some activists and commentators stating that during the past years, the violations have decreased in Bahrain, and that the level of torture against the detainees and prisoners has decreased. But according to our documentation, this claim is not actually entirely true. We are still monitoring and documenting human rights violations in Bahrain, and the numerous violations appear to us, whether on the physical level, the psychological level, as well as violations in the due process of a victim or activist. Let me give an example of a case that we just recently received a decision on as an opinion from the UN Working Group on arbitrary detention, which was issued on 15 May 2020. It is a case that the Bahraini government called the Zulfikar case, where they have claimed that a group of 115 defendants out of 138 Bahraini citizens all are terrorists or have done terrorist activities, and convicted them in a mass trial on 15 May 2018. ADHRB received consent to represent at least 20 individuals in this case, and with the help of their families and the victims themselves, who provided us with accurate and highly credible information, we are able to bring their case before the United Nations. All of them reported enforced disappearances, torture, numerous due process and fair trial rights violations, and sectarian ill-treatment. ADHRB was able to receive a smuggled handwritten letter from one of the victims in Zulfikar case from inside the prison. He describes in detail the most brutal and severe forms of physical and psychological torture used by Bahraini authorities against him during the 25 days where he was subjected to enforced disappearance. We published his letter on our website under Anonymous Victim of Torture, which I strongly invite you to read. As an example for the violation faced by prisoners, I would like to highlight on one of the defendant cases in Zulfikar case. It is the case of Mahmoud Saeed Abdullah. Mahmoud was an 18 years old freshman student in college when he was arrested and beaten severely by civilian masked forces along with other commandos in front of his mother. These forces raided, searched, and vandalized the house warrantlessly, taking Mahmoud's belongings and electronics. Mahmoud was taken to the bus where he was beaten again and weapons pointed at his head and was handcuffed from behind. Mahmoud was subjected to an enforced disappearance for almost a month, where his family didn't know anything about their son's whereabouts. During these 28 days, Mahmoud faced physical, psychological torture in both investigation buildings, Adliya and Building 15 in Joe Prison. In order to curse a confession, he reported it as the most brutal and severe torture He was subjected to harsh beatings and electric shocks all over his body. He was insulted and deprived of food and water. As a form of psychological pressure, authorities brought a woman behind a barrier, telling Mahmoud that it was his mother and threatening him in an attempt to pressure him into confessing. After that specific incident, Mahmoud signed papers without knowledge of their contents. During the interrogation period, Mahmoud described officers taking him to a warehouse full of weapons. At an unknown location, the officers accused him of possessing these weapons. Throughout his pre-trial detention, he was denied access to his lawyer. Throughout the trial process, the prosecution and the court didn't allow Mahmoud to speak and was not allowed to attend all the court sessions. Mahmoud is being held now at a new dry dock prison, a prison for the prisoners under the age of 21, serving a life sentence in prison for charges related to joining a terrorist cell, which the government called Zulfikar Brigades. ADHRB legal team presented Mahmoud's case among 20 other Bahraini cases. Let me show you their pictures because they are not just numbers. Presented their cases in a full documentation to the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. They basically examined the facts with the Bahraini government and reached the conclusion that these individuals have been detained arbitrarily and by the Bahraini government. These cases and others that we present to the United Nations offices lead us to say that the widespread and systematic imprisonment in Bahrain or other severe deprivation of liberty in violation of the rules of international law may constitute crimes against humanity. These cases that we documented, in fact, not only represent the suffering of the 115 Bahrainis who we were convicted in Zulfikar case, but further, a large segment of Bahraini society that attempted in 2011 to demand government change in terms of democracy, justice, and the freedom of opinion and expression. Again, you say that I can go on and discuss the other cases. If you go to the joint communications that is periodically released from the different experts at the United Nations, whether they are the special rapporteur on torture, on freedom of assembly, on freedom of expression, and so many others, you are going to see a consistent pattern of communications between those experts and the Bahraini government, raising different cases, issues, and violations that happen to ordinary citizens, activists, and the human rights defenders in the countries. The pattern I can conclude, or easy to be concluded by expertise in this area, is that the Bahraini government is engaged in systematic human rights violations. The basic problem is that it has gotten normalized within the legal system in Bahrain. I'm afraid that they are no longer even recognized by authority as violations because they have become so widespread and prevalent that the right of the victim or the due process doesn't even exist anymore. In conclusion, the human rights situation in the country has gotten worse. The right to criticize the government doesn't even exist. You cannot criticize the government, whether on social media or other channels of communication, because there are no guarantees protecting citizens from arrest or mistreatment, despite the attention that the Bahraini government has received from the special procedures of the United Nations or INGOs like Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch. Such criticism has not changed the state behavior. So we need to think what else can be done to put the Bahraini government on notice for their unacceptable behavior, which does not fall within the system of a responsible state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salma. I think if there is one theme I can draw from the three speakers that spoke, Dr. Saeed or Fabiana or Salma, is the spread of culture of impunity, lack of accountability in the country, and the political decay that will stop against any human rights improvement in the country, even if there were any serious efforts. So let's assume if there were any serious efforts, the political system right now does not allow it, or it will not sustain it. Before I turn the floor to Ali, I just want to recognize two special guests we have in the audience, and I hope there'll be an opportunity for them to express their opinion or share some thoughts with us. We have human rights defenders, Mr. Ibrahim al-Dimistani, who paid the ultimate price, if we can call it that. He lost his son in the pro-democracy movement in Bahrain in 2011. So I don't think anyone can say that he sacrificed or someone sacrificed more than what Mr. Dimistani went through. We also have in the audience Dr. Jalal Fayrouz, the former member of parliament in Bahrain and a member of the Wufaq political society, the largest organized political opposition in the group. So with that, Ali, you've heard our colleagues, Selma, Fabiana, and Dr. Saeed. We would like to hear from you as a political activist, as a son of Mr. Hassan Mshama. We see his picture behind you. So Ali, without any further ado, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear my voice clear?
If you could speak louder or come closer, I guess, to the mic or speak or microphone.
I got, okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and special thanks to ADHRB for organizing this important event. In a few days, it will be the 25th anniversary of the martyrdom of young man, Saeed al-Iskafi, who was killed under torture in 1995 when he was 17 years old. I was personally tortured 3 years after this crime happened. I was arrested when I was 15 years old in 1998. I was tortured in a cell next to the one in which Martyr al-Iskafi was killed. I was forced to stand for hours while being blindfolded. I was beaten. It made me think of what he went through. And during that time, my father was also detained. He spent 6 years in a prison without trial due to his political speeches calling for change. After a quarter of century since the martyrdom of Saeed al-Iskafi under torture, until this moment, no investigation commission has been opened and no one has been held to account for their involvement in the killing of this young man. To this day, torture still exists within the Al Khalifa regime. After the revolution erupted in 2011, others have been killed inside the prison from being tortured, including Ali Saqr, Karim Fakhrawi, Zakaria al-Ashiri, and many others. During the uprising of 90s, martyr Saeed al-Iskafi and many others were killed and thousands were arrested without trial, including my father. But things, as Dr. Saeed Shahabi mentioned, things calmed down in 2001 after the current king assumed power to succeed his father who passed away. Then he released all political prisoners and allowed the deportees to return home. However, the release of prisoners did not result in a political stability within the country because it did not result in a real change or solve the corrupt political system. Therefore, the popular uprising was revived and my father and thousands of citizens were arrested in 2011. Torture was resumed even more severely and the conditions got worse than they were in the 90s. So I can attest to this. 2 years ago, I had to take part in a sit-in for 63 days, of which I spent 46 days on hunger strike, sleeping in the street outside the Bahrain embassy in London to protest the denial of medical treatment, which turned into a new weapon to eliminate the opposition. It was a slow killing tool to get rid of them. So you can imagine now, if obtaining treatment and medicine requires all this suffering and the struggle, then what is the price we need to pay to obtain our political and the human rights, for which we have paid enormous costs? So now, I hope this very short speech conveys the severity of systematic torture within the Al Khalifa regime. And I would like to conclude with the following points. Firstly, while we demand the freedom of political prisoners, I believe that their release without a political solution that grants the rights of self-determination will result a return of violation, torture, and the repetition of past experiences. Secondly, we have made great sacrifices in the course of the struggle that extends for nearly a century, and it is impossible to accept any unfair political price for these sacrifices. It is our right, like others in this world, to enjoy freedom, safety, and equality in order to feel our human dignity. And these rights are not for negotiation. Thirdly, and finally, I would like to say to freedom lovers, especially in European countries, that we look forward to our support through your contribution to put pressure on your governments and demand that they stop their support for dictatorships and stop supplying them with weapons, because their support for these systems loses stability and denies the values of ethics that they claim to promote. Thank you, Hussein.
Thank you, Ali. Before I open up for question and answer, I want to ask Mr. Ibrahim Demistani. Mr. Demistani, you lost your son in the pro-democracy movement. No one can feel your feelings or unless they go through it. We talked about the concept of accountability. Could you elaborate in a few minutes? What was it for you and your family, or how, what kind of reaction or conversation you had with the Bahraini authorities when you lost your son in the pro-democracy movement? And without getting too personal, the culture of impunity in general in the country, how did that play the role in the ongoing systematic human rights violations? Mr. Ibrahim, if you could share with us some of your thoughts on this, please, if you would unmute.
Thank you, Hussein, and thanks to all the speakers. Just I would like to conclude what I would like to say. When I participated with my colleagues in treating the injured protesters, first of all, I didn't expect that the regime will target us or will arrest us. As a professional, we did our job because we saw the huge number of injured protesters. So we took the responsibility and we started treating them. But when I arrested in the criminal investigation department, I saw how the regime was a savage regime. During the torturing, and the torture was repeating this word that you are going to follow your son. We killed him, and you are going to follow him. Also, when I was in the prison, the special investigation unit, they came to us in the prison just to investigate with us about the torturing and that we exposed to. And we insisted that the torturer, Mubarak ibn Hawayl, he should be arrested now because he caused a lot of injury to us. And some of our colleagues died in the prison. One of them, Ali Sagar, he was behind me and he was crying and he was hallucinating with someone. Then suddenly he became quiet. Then we know that he passed away. When I released from the prison, I still call that there should be accountability to this. But suddenly we found that the Prime Minister, he visited the Mubarak ibn Ahwal in his house, and he said that there is no accountability to you. When someone will accountable you, that we will accountable us as a regime. So we believe that this regime will not accountable the torturer, but he appreciated them. Still, we are calling for accountability, but we think that the regime will not target or will accountable the torture due to they appreciated them. Anyhow, we are going to continue our path in calling and insisting to accountable all those torture, the killers, and we will continue our path in this.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. I don't think Dr. Jalal with us. I think he dropped. Dr. Jalal, if you're, I could not see you on the list. Yeah, I think I'm correct. He's no longer with us. So I have a few questions. We received both. We have one question here in the chat, and I also have some question we received via Twitter. So I'm gonna ask these all these questions at once, and then we'll open the floor to each of the participants. We have a few minutes left. So question to Fabiana, and this is also for the rest. Bahrain has set up different think tanks across Europe to counter the narrative presented by NGOs like BIRD and ADHRB. What can NGO do to combat this? So this is one question, if you can put in your mind. Another question is for Dr. Saeed, and also open for the rest of the panelists. Do you think there is any chance that King Hamad changes his strategy and decide it's worth to release all prisoners of conscience and set up and ease up on torture again? Would the political opposition accept this gesture, or do you think they would keep fighting just as hard for change in political system as well? Last question is also for the panelists. Can we have human rights under dictatorship? Assuming this is true to an extent, and given the Bahraini government, what can we do as individual and NGO to force an effective reconciliation process, human rights, and end the culture of impunity in Bahrain? Dr. Saeed, if you could begin answering, and I'll just go down the list. If you could unmute, please.
Thank you. I think each of us should have only one question, otherwise there is no time. So I will answer the question that was posed to us, I think, to me. Where is it about King Hamad, if he released prisoners? Well, we didn't revolt for the prisoners. We revolted against the regime, and in the process, the regime did the act of arresting and torturing people. So the prisoners are not to be used as a bargaining chip. They should not be there. Everybody said, even now when Nabil Rajab was released, Amnesty International said he shouldn't have been in the prison in the first place. So this is nothing to bargain about. They should be out, and not only they should be out, but their torturers must be brought to justice, because this is the mistake that happened in 2001. Everybody came out of prison, but the torturers remained where they were. So they started torturing people again 8 years later or 9 years later. So there's no point of repeating the same exercise, reinventing the wheel every time. This is number one. We do not consider releasing the prisoners as a matter for compromise. They should be released. Not only us, but everybody in the world should say that. Our main aim is political. We want political transformation, because even if he release the prisoners, he will rearrest them. How many prisoners now in jail were released, say, 5 years ago and rearrested again? So they will be rearrested. There's no point. Many of them have Hussein Mushema. This is the third time in his life he was arrested. In the 80s, he spent maybe 1 or 2 years. In the 90s, he spent 6 years. And now he spent 10 years. So what's the use of every time he was released? Because he will be rearrested again. As for the political change, we demand on it. We will continue. We have persevered for, in my case, half a century or more, and some of the people in our country have been in the opposition longer than me, and they are still alive. So it is a generational struggle. If we couldn't achieve it now, our grandchildren will achieve it one day.
Fabiana, how through your work, how would you counter the different institutions that the Bahraini government has either created or contracted with that spread false information or propaganda, pro-Bahraini government propaganda? You've worked with different parliamentarians, you've done advocacy. So what kind of strategies you as a member of an NGO has when it comes to dealing with such information?
So Bahrain not only uses think tanks or other institutions across Europe to counter our work, the NGO's work, but also other tools such as trade and fundings, like the one that we have been working with La Sapienza University in Rome, which has a chair dedicated to the King of Bahrain. The only thing NGOs can do to counter this counterattack is to continue to tell the truth, tell what is really happening in Bahrain, and continue to work with the parliaments and continue to advocate this in order to spread the truth and see what we can do. I don't think, at least for me, there is actually anything else that can be done other than stating the truth that Bahrain is trying to hide.
Thank you, Fabiana. Ali, can we have human rights under dictatorship? Can we somehow separate the two? And as an NGO or activist, what would be, well, not as an NGO, but as a son of a political leader, as a political activist, what would be your response or thoughts on that?
Okay, I'll try to be clear. I'm always optimistic, but I don't have hope with the Al Khalifa regime, to be honest. My father was tortured from members of Al Khalifa royal family. And the son of the king, Prince Nasser bin Hamad, he himself directly tortured some opposition inside the prison. And the king himself, he gave the order to demolish more than 35 mosques in Bahrain. So their hands, it's full with our blood. So how can we, I don't have hope that we can live with them or we can accept their controlling us and doing what they want, and respecting our the martyrdom, respecting the sacrificer will make us be strongly saying continue our struggle, continue our fighting to reach our freedom till we get our rights to self-determination. Self-determination, not self-determination, which means that we can choose who govern the country, not Al Khalifa decide how they control the country. I don't know if it makes sense what I say.
Salma, you raised some pictures initially or during your presentation, you brought this human touch to it, that they are not numbers. And we heard from Mr. Demistani, who lost his son during the pro-democracy movement. Could you, in a minute or two, tell us your interaction with these victims or their families? What is their message to, whether it's the NGOs or the special procedures, or the INGO per se, or basically the international community? What do they expect once they do the documentation with you?
Thank you. I would rather prefer to speak in Arabic and answer in Arabic. And so if you please, can you translate to be more clear?
Okay, go ahead. I think we're having technical difficulties.
الذين نتواصل معهم دائما، نحن كنشطاء ومنظمات حقوقية. I'm receiving your voice. Can you hear my voice?
Go ahead.
Okay. نحن كنشطاء ونشطاء نعمل في منظمات حقوقية، ومن خلال تواصلنا مع الأهالي وعوائل المعتقلين والضحايا طبعا يعني تظهر أمامنا صور للانتهاكات فظيعة جدا، قد تؤثر علينا طبعا من خلال ما نجده من كثرة انتهاكات وجود نظام ديكتاتوري كما وصفه الحاضرون. لكن كون أنهم هم أهل الضحايا والضحايا أنفسهم الذين يتواصلون معنا أحيانا من داخل السجن، والأهالي الذين يذرفون الدموع على أبنائهم الذين يتم انتهاك حقوقهم، هم لم يستسلموا، هم يريدون أن يوصلوا صوتهم إلى هذه الحكومات الغربية التي عليها أن تسمع. يجب أن لا نستسلم، يجب أن لا نشعر بالإحباط. هم لم يشعروا، فكيف بنا نحن؟ يجب أن نرفع صوتهم، أن نكون صادقين في رفع الانتهاكات، نمضي ضمن الآليات ووفق آليات الأمم المتحدة، نرفع الشكاوى، نوثق الحقائق. وهذا الأمر يشكل ضغط كبير على الحكومات التي تدعي، الحكومات الغربية الكبرى التي تدعي أنها تمشي وفق نظام حقوق الإنسان، وهذا يعني يؤدي إلى إحراجها أكثر، فتضطر أن تقوم ببعض الضغوط ليس لدى التي نمضي فيها نحن كمنظمات حقوق الإنسان، ويجب أن لا يشعر بالإحباط.
Okay, Selma, I'll try my best. There was lots of internet issues, I don't know your side or my side, but what she said, that we as activists or members of NGO, when we deals with victims or their families, there is a clear message from them that we don't give up. So if these families are not given up, if these victims are not given up, especially those who call us from prison and want us to do documentation or document their cases and get their voices out there, so that give us a push to continue. And we have to be truthful or true to ourselves, that when we take these documentation to the different international procedures or international body, we represent them, represent these victims, and to be the voice of these victims. And once these international bodies issues their statement or their joint communication, this is used against Western governments that support Bahrain, and the claim is that they support human rights violation, or they support human rights in different parts of the world, but here comes an ally who does not respect human rights. This creates a political pressure. Now, again, I could not verbatim translate what Selma said because of the internet, and plus I'm not an expert or expert in translation. I think we want to end this by, I see Dr. Jalal Fayrouz just joined us. I think it will be an opportunity for us to hear from him. As we said, he's a former member of the Bahraini parliament. He's a member of Al-Wufaq political society, the largest organized political group in Bahrain that was disbanded. And the Secretary General of Al-Wufaq, Sheikh Ali Salman, one of the prominent leaders of the pro-democracy movement in Bahrain, is serving life in prison for no crime but that he advocated for democracy and human rights in Bahrain. Dr. Jalal, if you could share with us some of your thoughts about the current situation in the country, and is there a possible reconciliation? Dr. Saeed, Fabiana, and the rest of the team or the panelists said that there is a serious political decay in the country that will prevent any respect for human rights. We would like to hear your thoughts in a few minutes before we end. The floor is yours, please.
Greetings to everyone. It's my pleasure to join you. I see so many people who I have met over the past years, and others new ones. I hope the best for all of you. I really think that Bahrain is related to this group of the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia and UAE. And unless there is really a change into the area, we wouldn't be expecting any much pro-democracy move from the regime in Bahrain, because they are now very much supported. The regime in Bahrain is very much financially supported by the Saudis and the Emiratis. They have also, the regime has spent billions of the Bahraini people's money in buying weapons from Trump administration, just to keep it mum or be showing alliance to the United States. And lately, of course, we have seen a very big move of just trying to forget the case of the Palestinians and just make a normalization of whatever atrocities are going on in the occupied land of Palestine. For all these reasons, we see that the regime of Bahrain will not be going towards any much of reconciliation with the people. There are lots of pressures internally and externally, because the economic is very bad. Is really the regime is on the side of edge of bankruptcy. But yes, the Saudis and Emiratis will come to their help. The people of Bahrain have been for decades just digging for their rights, for their regaining democracy, sort of democracy, but they have not been successful. But on the other side, they did not kneel down. They have not stopped their efforts towards gaining their dignity and democracy. I believe that as in the past almost a decade, the people have seen the fearful face of the regime of Bahrain. It will not be very easy for them to come just to some new plays from the regime. My final say is that how much would the human rights organizations have, or the international bodies have, on the regime of Bahrain? On the last decade, we have seen that it's not been much. We have seen that both the United Nations and the Human Rights Council have not been very effective in the case of Bahrain. They have not done whatever their obligations are on Bahrain. Unfortunately, you would see regimes like Saudi Arabia are being pardoned or taken out of the blacklist of even though they are continuing their atrocities against the Yemeni people, and you could see that the same is happening in Bahrain. So unfortunately, the Human Rights Council is governed by the governments, but not by the people, and what we call the the international community is nothing but the United States and some of its allies. Others are not very much of powerful in it. But on this saying, I think we have to continue our struggle. We have to continue to disclose the atrocities. We have to continue to push through to whatever possible to try at least to ease the pressure on the 5,000 political prisoners in the jails in Bahrain and all the atrocities being committed. Thank you very much for the time.
At the end, I want to thank all our panelists for their presentation, Fabiana, Dr. Saeed, Selma, and Ali. And I also want to thank our two guests that I did not coordinate with them previously to speak, Mr. Ibrahim Dimstani and Dr. Jalal Fayrouz. Certainly, the conversation lead us to think what could be the policy recommendation we recommend to the two biggest ally of Bahrain, that is the United States and UK. Certainly, one thing we can conclude and agree on: the current status quo cannot continue. More oppression is sign of instability, and if these Western countries look at Bahrain as a place where they have interest, certainly they don't have their interest in a country that is stable. With that, I want to thank all of you for participating today and hope to see some of you or all of you in our future event. Thank you.